The city exhaled fog from its ancient lungs each evening, wrapping the narrow streets in silver gauze as the sun retreated behind the cathedral spires. In the oldest quarter, where cobblestones still remembered the weight of horse-drawn carriages and the gas lamps had never been replaced with their electric descendants, time moved differently. It pooled in doorways and collected in the corners of forgotten courtyards, patient as dust, eternal as sorrow. Malachar Valdris walked these streets as he had walked 1,000 others across 6 centuries. His footsteps made no sound against the wet stones. His reflection, had anyone thought to look, appeared only as a faint suggestion in the darkened shop windows, a smudge of shadow, a trick of light, nothing more. He had perfected the art of being nearly invisible long before this modern age had learned to look past anything that did not glow with the blue light of their endless screens. He was old, not merely in the way of men who have seen decades pile upon decades, but in the way of mountains, of deep rivers, of stars that have burned so long they no longer remember their own beginning. The weight of it pressed against his chest with each breath he did not need to take, a habit maintained only for the comfort of appearing human to the few mortals who still noticed him at all. Once, he had been a king. The title meant nothing now. The kingdom had dissolved into borders that had been redrawn and redrawn again until the very concept of his domain existed only in history books that scholars rarely opened. He had watched his castle crumble, first to siege, then to neglect, and finally to time itself. He had returned once, a century ago, and found only foundations beneath the encroaching forest, wildflowers growing where his throne had stood. He had wept that night. It had been the last time. Now he existed in the margins, a rented flat above a bookshop that sold volumes no one purchased, a wardrobe of dark wool and older silk, a collection of letters from the dead, bound in leather and locked in a chest he rarely opened. He fed when necessary, carefully, from those who would not be missed, or from the small creatures that ventured too close to his window in the dark hours. He had not taken a human life in over 200 years, though the hunger never truly faded. It merely settled into a dull ache behind his ribs, a companion as constant as his solitude. This evening, as autumn pressed its cold fingers against the city, Malachar found himself drawn to the corner establishment he had discovered 3 months prior. It was called the Midnight Lantern, though the sign was so faded the words were nearly illegible. A small cafe that served food he did not eat and coffee he did not drink, staffed by people who worked the hours between dusk and dawn, catering to the insomniacs, the heartbroken, the night shift workers trudging home, and the occasional creature like himself who found the darkness more comfortable than day. He came for the atmosphere, for the way the candlelight flickered against the exposed brick walls, for the scratch piano in the corner that sometimes played beneath the fingers of an elderly man who never spoke to anyone, for the heavy velvet curtains that blocked out the street, creating a pocket of perpetual twilight that asked nothing of him. And lately, though he would not admit it even to himself, he came for her. She moved between the tables like water finding its path around stones, graceful, unhesitating, certain. Her eyes were the color of winter clouds, pale and unseeing, and she carried a white cane that she rarely used within the cafe's familiar geography. The other staff treated her with the careful distance people often afforded to those they perceived as fragile, but Malachar had watched her long enough to understand that she was anything but. Her name was Ilara. He had learned this from the owner, an aging woman named Mrs. Marchetti, who believed herself an excellent judge of character and had therefore decided, upon Malachar's 3rd visit, that he was a gentleman of the old school and worthy of her grudging approval. Ilara had worked at the Midnight Lantern for 2 years. She had been blind since birth. She lived alone in a small apartment nearby and walked to work each evening regardless of weather. She was, in Mrs. Marchetti's estimation, the best worker I've ever had, and she sees more than people with perfectly good eyes. Malachar had not asked these questions. Mrs. Marchetti had simply offered the information, as elderly women often did when they decided someone needed to know something. He had listened, cataloging each detail, telling himself it was merely the habit of centuries of observation. He knew it was more than that. There was something about her, something that pulled at the hollow space behind his sternum, where his heart still beat its slow, reluctant rhythm. When she passed near his usual table in the corner, he caught the scent of her, lavender soap, old paper, and beneath it something warmer, something that made the hunger stir in ways he had nearly forgotten. Her blood sang to him. He could hear it moving through her veins, could sense the steady percussion of her heart, and the melody of it was unlike anything he had encountered in all his long existence. It terrified him. Tonight, the cafe was nearly empty. A young man dozed over a lukewarm cup at a table by the window. An elderly couple shared a pot of tea near the piano, their hands intertwined in the easy way of those who had been together for decades. Mrs. Marchetti had gone home early, leaving Alara to close. Malachar sat in his corner, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him, a book open on the table, more prop than entertainment. He watched Alara move through her closing routine, wiping down tables with practiced efficiency, counting the register by touch, arranging the chairs just so. She hummed softly as she worked, a melody he did not recognize, and the sound of it settled into his bones like the first warmth of spring after an endless winter. She paused near his table, tilted her head in that way she had, as though listening for something beyond the ordinary range of human hearing. "You're still here," she said. Not a question. "I am. You're always the last to leave." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, uninvited, with a small smile. "I've been wanting to ask you something." Malachar felt something contract in his chest. "Yes? Why do you come here every night and order coffee you never drink?" He had been careful. He had brought the cup to his lips, performed the motions of drinking when he sensed eyes upon him. But she had no eyes to watch him with, only ears that caught the absence of swallowing, the unchanged weight of the cup when she cleared his table, the way the liquid was always exactly as full as when she had poured it. "You notice a great deal," he said carefully. "I notice everything that matters." She folded her hands on the table. Her fingers were long, elegant, marked with small calluses. "You move too quietly. You never eat. You smell like—" She stopped, searching for the word. "Like old churches. Like stone and time and something underneath that I don't have a name for. Perhaps I am simply a quiet man with poor appetite who visits cathedrals. Perhaps." Her smile widened slightly. "But you aren't, are you?" Malachar said nothing. The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft creak of the old building settling, the distant sound of rain beginning to fall, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. "I'm not afraid," she said finally. "Whatever you are. I've known something was different about you since the first night you walked in. I can feel it, like pressure against my skin, like standing too close to a fire that doesn't burn." She leaned forward slightly. "I know you're not going to hurt me. How can you possibly know that? Because you've been coming here for 3 months and you've never once been anything but gentle. Because when Mrs. Marchetti went home early last week and I dropped a tray of glasses, you were across the room before they hit the floor and caught every single one. No human moves that fast." She tilted her head again. "And because right now, your voice sounds like you're in pain, and I don't think it's the kind of pain that comes from wanting to do harm." Malachar closed the book before him with careful deliberation. His hands, he noticed, were trembling slightly, an occurrence so rare he could not remember the last time it had happened. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Alara." "Probably both." She reached across the table, her hand finding his with unerring accuracy, and the contact sent a shock through his ancient body that stole whatever words he might have spoken next. Her skin was warm, her touch was light but certain, and when her fingers wrapped around his, cold, always cold, no matter how much time passed, she did not flinch. "Tell me what you are," she said softly. "Please. I've spent my whole life in darkness, listening for the truth of things. I know when someone is drowning in loneliness. I know when someone needs to be seen." Her clouded eyes seemed impossibly to find his. "Let me see you." And Malachar, who had kept his secrets for 600 years, who had watched empires rise and fall without speaking a word of his true nature, who had buried everyone he had ever allowed himself to love, felt the walls he had built begin to crack. "I am old," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Older than this city, older than the foundations it was built upon. I was born in a kingdom that no longer exists, to a family whose bloodline ended with my transformation. I was a king once, for a brief span of mortal years, before a creature of the night found me dying on a battlefield and offered me a choice between death and something far more complicated." Alara did not release his hand. "How long?" 643 years. She absorbed this in silence. Her thumb traced slow circles against his palm, and the sensation was almost more than he could bear. "That's a long time to be alone," she said finally. "Yes." The word caught in his throat. "Yes, it is." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows, and the candles flickered as if stirred by an invisible breath. Alara rose, still holding his hand, and gently tugged him to his feet. "Come with me," she said. "I want to show you something." She led him through the back of the cafe, past the small kitchen and the storage room, to a narrow staircase he had never noticed. It wound upward into darkness, no challenge for his eyes, which saw as clearly in shadow as in light, but she navigated it with the same quiet confidence she showed in everything. The stairs ended at a door that opened onto the roof. The city spread before them, glittering with rain and light, and above it all, the clouds had parted just enough to reveal a sliver of moon. Alara released his hand and walked to the edge, tilting her face upward as though she could feel the silver light even if she could not see it. "I come up here sometimes," she said, "when the cafe closes and the world gets too loud. I can hear the whole city from here, the cars, the voices, the river, all of it alive, all of it moving." She turned back toward him. "But I've never been able to share it with anyone who would really understand what it means to stand apart from all that life." Malachar moved to stand beside her. The rain was cold against his face, indistinguishable from his own temperature, but he found he did not mind it. "Why are you not afraid?" he asked again. "I have told you what I am. You must know what that means. The hunger, the violence, the centuries of death that trail behind me like a shadow." "Because I know something about darkness," she said simply. "I've lived in it my whole life, and I've learned that it's not the darkness itself that's dangerous. It's what we choose to do within it." She reached up, her fingers finding his face with that same unerring accuracy, tracing the line of his jaw, the hollows of his cheeks. "You've chosen to be gentle. For 200 years, you said. That's not a monster. That's a man fighting to stay human." Her touch burned, not with pain, but with something far more dangerous, with the awakening of feelings he had spent centuries burying, with the resurrection of hope he had long ago declared dead. "There was a woman," he said, and the words surprised him. He had not intended to speak them. 300 years ago. Her name was Isabel. She was the daughter of a merchant in Vienna, and she saw me as you do, without fear, without revision. I thought—" He stopped, the memory rising like bile. "I thought I could keep her safe. I thought my love would be enough. What happened? Those who hunt my kind found us. They burned her house with her inside it, while I watched, bound by chains blessed by their priests. They made me watch her die, and then they left me to the sunrise, certain the light would finish what they had started." His voice had gone flat, empty. "But I am old, older than their chains could hold. I survived, and I have carried her with me ever since." Ilara's hand moved from his face to his chest, pressing against the place where his slow heart continued its reluctant work. "You're still carrying her," she said. "I can feel it, the weight of her. I cannot set it down. Maybe you're not meant to." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, could hear every nuance of her steady pulse. "Maybe we're meant to carry the people we've loved, and losing them doesn't mean letting go. It means learning to walk with the weight." He looked down at her, this small blind woman who had seen through him more completely in a single evening than anyone had in centuries, and felt something shift in the architecture of his eternal existence. A door opening, a window letting in light. "You are remarkable," he said. "I'm just paying attention." She smiled, and it was like watching dawn break over a frozen landscape. "Something I've gotten quite good at, all things considered." The rain began to ease, and in the silence that followed, Malachar became aware of another sound. Footsteps in the street below, multiple sets moving with purpose, and beneath that, the familiar scent of wolfsbane and silver, of blessed oil and old hatred, hunters. His body went rigid, and Alara felt the change immediately. "What is it?" "We need to go inside." He took her hand, guiding her back toward the door. "Now, tell me. There are people who hunt creatures like me. They have found me." He could feel them drawing closer, could sense the ancient malice that drove them. These were not the clumsy amateurs who stumbled upon his kind by accident. These were the old families, the ones who had passed down their sacred duty through generations, who carried weapons forged specifically to destroy those who walked in shadow. They must have been tracking me for weeks. The door to the roof burst open before they could reach it. 3 figures emerged, clad in dark coats that concealed armor and weapons. The leader was a woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that held the cold certainty of absolute faith. She raised a crossbow, its bolt gleaming with the telltale sheen of blessed silver. "Malachar Valdris," she said, "the Crimson King, we have been searching for you for a very long time. I am no longer a king." He positioned himself between the hunters and Alara, his body a shield. "And I have harmed no one in this city. You have no quarrel with me." "You exist. That is quarrel enough." The woman's finger tightened on the trigger. "Step away from the girl. Our fight is not with her." "She has seen too much," one of the others said, a young man with the zealous light of fresh conversion in his eyes. "She cannot be allowed to—" "She is innocent," Malachar interrupted, his voice taking on an edge that belonged to the being he had tried so hard to leave behind. Touch her, and I will remind you why your ancestors called me the Crimson King. The leader hesitated. She had heard the stories clearly, knew the legends of the vampire who had once commanded armies of the damned, who had painted battlefields red in the ages before he chose restraint. The crossbow wavered slightly. We are not here for slaughter, she said carefully. We are here for justice. Come with us peacefully, and the girl lives. Malachar? Ilara's voice was calm, impossibly calm given the circumstances. Her hand found his, and she squeezed. Don't. They will kill me regardless of what I do. Maybe, but you've spent 600 years trying to be something other than what they think you are. Don't prove them right now. The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at her, blind, vulnerable, facing death with a courage that put his centuries of existence to shame, and felt the rage that had begun to build in his chest slowly subside. If I surrender, he said to the hunter, you will let her go. Unharmed, you will not follow her, watch her, or involve her in any way. Swear it. The woman lowered her crossbow slightly. You would surrender for the life of a human you barely know? I would surrender for the possibility that I might finally become the thing I have been trying to be. He released Ilara's hand and stepped forward. Do we have an accord? A long silence. The rain had stopped entirely now, and the moon emerged more fully from behind the clouds, bathing them all in silver light. We have an accord, the hunter said finally, but you will come with us immediately, and if you attempt to escape or harm any of my people, I understand. Malachar turned to Ilara. Go home. Forget you. Ever met me? Live your life? No. The word hung in the air between them. Ilara stepped forward, her chin raised, her clouded eyes somehow defiant. I'm not going to let you sacrifice yourself for me and just walk away. That's not how this works. You have no say in this matter. I have every say. She moved until she was standing directly before the hunter, this small blind woman facing down centuries of hatred and purpose. You want justice? I'll tell you what justice looks like. It looks like a man who has spent 200 years refusing to harm anyone, even when it would have been easy. It looks like someone who came to my cafe every night just to sit in the presence of human warmth, who caught my falling glasses because he couldn't bear to see me upset, who told me his story because I asked and he was tired of being alone. The hunter stared at her. You don't know what he has done, the lives he has taken. I know exactly what he's done, he told me, and I know what he's chosen to become since then. Ilara's voice was steady, unwavering. Everyone deserves the chance to change. Even the monsters, especially the monsters. Isn't that what mercy is supposed to mean? Something shifted in the hunter's expression, a crack in the armor of certainty, a flicker of doubt. She looked from Ilara to Malachar and back again. What is she to you? She demanded. Malachar opened his mouth to say nothing, no one, just a human I happened to encounter. But the words would not come, because they were not true, and somewhere in the course of this impossible evening, he had lost the ability to lie about it. I do not know, he said instead, but I believe, he paused, searching for words that had not been spoken in centuries. I believe she may be the reason I have survived this long, the reason I was meant to survive, the answer to a question I did not know I was asking. The young zealot laughed harshly. A soulmate? You expect us to believe that a creature of darkness has found its soulmate in a blind waitress? I expect nothing from you. Malachar's gaze remained fixed on the leader. But I am telling you the truth. She sees me, truly sees me, in a way no one has in 600 years, perhaps in a way no one ever has, and I would rather face your judgment than live without having known her. The roof fell silent. Somewhere in the city below, a church bell began to toll. Midnight, the hour between days, the threshold moment when anything might happen. The hunter lowered her crossbow entirely. My grandmother told me a story once, she said slowly, about a vampire she had encountered in her youth. He had killed her brother, and she had spent years hunting him. When she finally found him, he was living as a hermit in the mountains, tending a garden and feeding only on animals. She had her crossbow trained on his heart, ready to fire, and he looked at her and said, I cannot undo what I have done, but I can choose what I do from this moment forward. Kill me if you must, but know that my death will not bring back your brother. It will only add another loss to the weight of the world. What did she do? Ilara asked. She walked away. The hunter's jaw tightened. She said it was the hardest thing she ever did. She said she hated herself for it for years afterward, but in the end, she came to believe that mercy was more powerful than vengeance, even for the undead. She turned to her companions. "We're leaving." The young zealot stepped forward, outraged. "You cannot be serious. He is one of the oldest of his kind, and he has harmed no one in 200 years. His own words freely given without coercion." The hunter's voice brooked no argument. "Our mission is to protect the innocent, not to slaughter the reformed. If we become the monsters we claim to fight, we are no better than the darkness we oppose." She looked back at Malachar one last time. "I will be watching. If you harm anyone at all, I will find you, and I will not walk away a second time." "I understand." The hunters retreated through the door, their footsteps fading down the stairs. Malachar listened until he heard them exit the building, until their heartbeats dissolved into the broader symphony of the city, until they were nothing but a memory of threat. Then his knees buckled. Alara caught him. Impossibly, this small blind woman caught the ancient vampire king as he fell and lowered them both gently to the rain-soaked roof. "You're shaking," she said. "I thought they would kill you." His voice cracked on the last word. "I thought I had led death to your doorstep, as I did with Isabel, as I have done with everyone I have ever—" She silenced him with her hand against his lips. "But they didn't, and I'm still here, and you're still here. Because of you, your words were just words. You're the one who chose to be the kind of man those words could apply to." She moved her hand to cup his face, and he leaned into the warmth of her touch like a creature starved for light. "You've spent 6 centuries believing you're a monster, but monsters don't catch falling glasses. Monsters don't sit alone in cafes just to hear the sound of human voices. Monsters don't fall to their knees in relief because the woman they barely know is safe. What am I then?" Alara smiled, and it was like watching the moon emerge from behind centuries of cloud. "You're lonely," she said, "and wounded, and very, very tired, just like me." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, and in that simple gesture of connection, Malachar felt something that had been locked inside him for longer than he could remember finally break free. He wept. The tears were strange. He had not cried since that night in the ruins of his kingdom, had not believed himself capable of it, but they came now, silent and unstoppable, and Alara held him through all of it. She did not offer comfort in words, did not try to minimize his grief. She simply held him, her warmth a shelter against the cold of his eternal existence, her heartbeat a steady rhythm that grounded him to the present moment. When the tears finally subsided, they sat together on the wet roof, looking out at the city that glittered below them like a constellation of earthbound stars. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know." She took his hand again, her fingers interlacing with his. "I've never had a 600-year-old vampire king as a—" She paused. "What are you exactly? A friend? Something more?" "I do not know either." He considered the question seriously. "I know that when I am near you, the hunger quiets. I know that your voice is the first thing that has made me feel alive in longer than I can remember. I know that the thought of leaving you causes me physical pain. That sounds like something more than friendship. It sounds like something I do not have words for. Something I have never experienced, not even with Isabel." He turned to look at her, really look at her, this remarkable woman who had changed everything in the space of a single evening. "You said before that I needed to be seen, but you are the one who has been unseen your whole life, walking through a world that refuses to accommodate you, fighting for space in a society built for those with sight. And yet, you see more clearly than anyone I have ever known. We're a pair then," she laughed softly. "The blind girl and the vampire who hides in plain sight. A pair." He tested the word, found that it fit. "Yes, I believe we are." The moon had moved across the sky, and the first hints of approaching dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. Malachar should have felt the familiar dread that came with the sun's approach, the urgency to find shelter, to retreat into darkness. But sitting here with Alara, he found that even that ancient fear had dulled. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "The sun will rise soon." "I know." She did not release his hand. "Will you come back? Tomorrow night? Every night, for as long as you will have me. That might be a very long time." He understood her meaning, heard the question beneath the words, the possibility of eternity offered without pressure, without expectation, a choice he had never thought to present to anyone again. "Let us take each night as it comes," he said. "There is no need to decide anything now." "Okay." She squeezed his hand once, then released it. "There's a cellar beneath the cafe. Mrs. Marchetti uses it for storage, but there's a section in the back that's completely dark. No windows. I can show you." He should have refused, should have retreated to his flat above the bookshop, to the familiar coffin, a prop more than a necessity, but a comfort nonetheless. that he had slept in for decades, but the thought of being even that far from her was suddenly unbearable. "Show me," he said. She led him back into the building, down a different set of stairs, through the kitchen, and into the basement. The cellar was exactly as she had described, dusty, cluttered with boxes and old furniture, and in the far corner, a small alcove that had once been a coal storage room. No light penetrated its depths. "It's not much," she said. "It is perfect." He settled into the darkness as the first rays of sun began to filter through the cafe's windows far above. Ilara knelt beside him, her hand finding his one last time. "Sleep well, Vampire King." "Malakar," he corrected. "I told you, I am no longer a king." "Malakar, then," she smiled. "I'll be here when you wake." And she was. Night after night, she was there. She brought him into her world slowly, carefully, introducing him to Mrs. Marchetti as a friend who worked unusual hours, teaching him the layout of her apartment so he could move through it in darkness, sharing with him the small details of her life that he found endlessly fascinating. The books she read in Braille, poetry mostly, and philosophy. The music she loved, jazz from decades past, played on an old record player that had belonged to her grandmother. The textures she collected, smooth stones, rough bark, weathered velvet, because touch was her way of knowing the world. In return, he gave her his centuries. He told her of the Byzantine Empire's fall, which he had witnessed from Constantinople's walls. He spoke of the Renaissance, of evenings spent in Florence where he had once watched a young Leonardo da Vinci sketch by candlelight, never guessing at the genius he was observing. He described the French Revolution's bloody chaos, the Industrial Revolution's smoke and noise, the two great wars that had nearly broken humanity entirely. He gave her history not as dry facts, but as living memory, and she drank it in like someone who had been thirsting all her life. Months passed, the seasons turned, and somewhere in the deepening of their connection, Malakar realized that he was no longer merely existing. He was living. The realization came to him on a winter evening as he watched Ilara navigate the snow-covered streets with her white cane and her unerring confidence. She was laughing at something he had said, some observation about the peculiar behavior of modern humans in shopping centers, and the sound of her laughter rang through the cold air like bells. "I love you," he said. She stopped walking, turned toward him, snowflakes catching in her dark hair. "Say that again." "I love you." The words came easier the second time, as though they had been waiting centuries to be spoken. "I love your courage and your wisdom. I love the way you refuse to let the world define what you are capable of. I love that you saw past my darkness to find something worth saving." He stepped closer, taking her face in his cold hands. "I love you, Ilara, and I do not say this to claim you or bind you. I say it because it is true, and because truth is the only gift I have left to give." She was crying. He could taste the salt of her, tears on the winter wind. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night on the roof. Maybe before that. Maybe I loved you the first time you walked into my cafe and ordered coffee you never drank." He kissed her then, there in the falling snow, his cold lips meeting her warm ones, and the world fell away, the city, the centuries, the weight of memory and loss. There was only this moment, this woman, this impossible grace. When they parted, she was shivering, from the cold, from emotion, from everything. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what?" "The question you've been too afraid to ask. The one I can feel hovering between us every time you look at me like you're memorizing my face." He knew what she meant. Of course he knew. "I cannot ask you to give up the sun for my sake, to surrender mortality, family, the natural course of a human life. You're not asking. I am." She gripped his hands with surprising strength. "I've spent 30 years in darkness, Malakar. The sun has never meant anything to me, except heat and schedules, early mornings and the sound of people going about their day. What you're offering? An eternity of nights, of your voice telling me about centuries I can only imagine, of this love that has turned my quiet life into something vast. That is worth more to me than any sunrise. You would become like me, hungry, eternal, cut off from the human world in ways you cannot yet understand. Then help me understand, take me with you, and show me what eternity looks like when it's not spent alone." She was asking him for forever. This blind waitress, this remarkable woman who had cracked open his ancient heart with nothing more than patience and perception, she was asking him to make her his companion for the rest of existence. "It will hurt," he said, his voice rough. "The transformation, the first century of adjustment, the losses that will come as everyone you have known grows old and dies while you remain unchanged." "I know." She reached up and traced the lines of his face, learning him once again through touch. But I won't be facing any of it alone. Neither will you. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her, lavender and old paper, and that warm something beneath that still sang to his blood, would always sing to him, and made his decision. Not tonight, he said, not in haste or cold or confusion. When you are certain, truly certain, tell me, and I will give you everything I am. I'm certain now. Then tell me again in spring, when the snow has melted and the world has remembered how to bloom. Give yourself time to be sure. She nodded against his chest, accepting his wisdom even as impatience flickered across her face. Spring then. Spring. They walked home through the snow, hand in hand, two figures of darkness and warmth making their way through the white blanketed streets. Above them, the moon watched with its ancient silver eye, and somewhere in the deep cold of the Bel's universe, the stars continued their eternal burning. Spring came, as it always does, slowly at first, then all at once. The snows retreated, the first green shoots pushed through the soil, and the city shook off its winter coat with an almost audible sigh of relief. Ilara did not waver. On the first night of true spring, when the air smelled of rain and renewal, she came to him in the cellar beneath the midnight lantern. She had prepared herself, said goodbye to Mrs. Marchetti under the guise of extended travel, closed up her apartment, tied off the loose ends of her mortal life. She came to him carrying nothing but a small bag of belongings and a certainty that had only deepened with time. I'm ready, she said. Malachar rose from the darkness to meet her. He had dreaded this moment as much as he had longed for it, the weight of responsibility, the fear of losing her to the transformation's violence. But beneath that dread was something else, hope, brilliant and terrible and real. There is no going back, he said. I know. You will feel the hunger. You will struggle with it. I will help you, but the first years will be hard. I know. You will outlive everyone and everything you have ever known. Except you. She took his hands in hers, warming them with her mortal heat for the last time. I will never outlive you, and you will never lose me to time or hunters or the frailty of human flesh. We will walk eternity together. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, her eyelids, her cheeks, her mouth, tasting her, memorizing her as she was in this final mortal moment. I love you, he said. I love you too. And then, with all the tenderness of 6 centuries crystallized into a single act, he gave her his eternal kiss. The transformation took 3 nights. Malachar stayed with her through all of it, holding her as the fever burned through her veins, cooling her brow when the pain became too much, whispering stories of all the wonders he would show her when she woke. He told her about the northern lights over Scandinavian fjords, the ancient forests of Eastern Europe where creatures older than vampires still roamed, the secret libraries hidden beneath the world's great cities, where all the lost knowledge of humanity was preserved. He painted pictures and words, giving her something to hold onto as her human body died and something new was born in its place. On the 3rd night, she opened her eyes. They had changed, no longer the clouded pale of winter skies, but silver, pure silver, shot through with threads of crimson that caught the candlelight like jewels. She blinked, sat up slowly, and turned toward him. I can see you, she whispered. He stared at her, not comprehending. What? I can see you. Tears of blood, the only tears vampires could cry, ran down her cheeks. Your face, your eyes, the way you're looking at me right now. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched his face, no longer needing to navigate, by feel alone. I've been blind my whole life, and now, the transformation had given her more than immortality. Whether by some quirk of supernatural healing or the universe's strange sense of justice, it had restored what she had never possessed: sight, vision, the ability to perceive the world as others did. And the first thing she saw was him. Is this... She looked around the cellar, drinking in the shadows and the dust and the humble surroundings, as though they were the most beautiful vista on earth. Is this what everything looks like? This is just a cellar. He was laughing and crying at once, overwhelmed by the impossible gift. Wait until you see moonlight on water. Wait until you see the stars. Show me. She was on her feet, unsteady but determined. Show me everything. He took her hand and led her up through the cafe, out into the spring night. The city spread before them, glittering with lights that reflected in her new silver eyes, and above it all stretched the vast canopy of the sky, moonless tonight, black velvet scattered with diamonds. Ilara tilted her head back and laughed with pure, uncontained joy. It's beautiful, she breathed. It's so beautiful. Malachar watched her discover the world he had grown numb to and felt his own sight renewed. The buildings were not just stone and brick, but architecture, art frozen in place. The people moving in the streets were not just heartbeats and blood, but stories walking, lives unfolding in real time. The trees beginning to bud were not just plants, but miracles of green and brown and silver bark. She had given him back the wonder he had lost, and he had given her the sight she had never had. They stood together on the threshold of eternity, two souls no longer alone, no longer bound by the limitations of their separate darknesses. The night stretched before them, infinite, full of promise, waiting to be explored. "Where do we go first?" she asked. Malachar considered the question. 6 centuries of wandering, a lifetime of solitude, and now, finally, a companion to share the journey. "Everywhere," he said. "We have time." She turned to him, and in her new silver eyes he saw reflected not just his own face, but the entirety of their shared future. The nights they would spend discovering the world together, the secrets they would uncover, the quiet moments and grand adventures, the challenges and the triumphs, all of it waiting, all of it possible. "Everywhere sounds perfect," she said. And hand in hand, the vampire king and the woman who had saved him, they walked into the endless night. Behind them, the midnight lantern sat quiet and dark, its candles extinguished, its chairs arranged in neat rows that would gather dust until some future owner discovered it and restored it to life. Mrs. Marchetti would return in the morning to find a letter and a key, a generous sum of money left for the kindness you showed a stranger in need. The cafe had served its purpose. It had been the meeting place between two souls separated by mortality and circumstance, the quiet stage on which an ancient story had found its newest chapter. Now that chapter was complete. A new one was beginning. And somewhere in the darkness, in the spaces between stars, in the silence between heartbeats, the universe acknowledged what had been forged, a love that had survived centuries of sorrow to find its home at last. Not in a kingdom or a castle, not in power or glory, but in the simple miracle of two people who had learned to see each other truly, the blind waitress and the vampire king, together, eternal, walking toward a horizon that would never end. Some stories conclude with endings, neat resolutions wrapped in ribbon, final words spoken, last doors closed. But this is not one of those stories. This is a story that continues in the shadows, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, in every city and every country where the night welcomes those who walk within it. If you listen carefully on spring evenings when the world is soft with rain and renewal, you might hear them. Laughter drifting from rooftops, whispered conversations in forgotten languages, the sound of 2 sets of footsteps moving in perfect synchronicity through streets that have forgotten their names. They are still out there, the vampire king and his beloved, writing their story across the centuries in ink that never fades. And perhaps, if you are very lucky, if you are very brave, if you learn to see beyond the surface of things to the truth that lies beneath, perhaps one night, in a small cafe that serves coffee no one drinks, you will look up and find them watching. They are always watching. They remember what it was to be seen, and they have eternity to return the gift.